Political or economic event. Radio Algeria International, our voice in the world.
This is the English service of Radio Algeria International. It's time for the news.
Algeria has expressed its surprise at the hasty and unilateral decision taken by the European Commission's Directorate General for Trade to open arbitration proceedings over what were presented as restrictions on trade and investment, contrary to the association agreement between Algeria and the EU. The participants in the 44th General Assembly of the Shelter Afrique Development Bank held in Algiers called at the end of their proceedings for inspiration from the Algerian experience in the housing sector. And the A3+ group in the UN Security Council has condemned the Zionist airstrikes that targeted several areas in Syria, including the capital, Damascus. Those were the headlines, and now the news in detail from Radio Algeria International. First in our news, Algeria has expressed its surprise at the hasty and unilateral decision taken by the European Commission's Directorate General for Trade to open arbitration proceedings over what were presented as restrictions on trade and investment, contrary to the association agreement between Algeria and the EU. A statement from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, National Community Abroad and African Affairs said that in response, the Minister of State, Minister of Foreign Affairs, National Community Abroad and African Affairs, Mr. Ahmed Attaf, sent an official letter on this matter to the High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy and Vice President of the European Commission, Ms. Kaya Kayas. In his letter, the Minister of State expressed the Algerian side's surprise at the European Union's hasty and unilateral decision to close the consultation phase and initiate arbitration proceedings, even though only 2 consultation meetings had been held over a short period of 2 months, and 6 of the 8 disputes raised by the European side were in the process of being resolved. Mr. Attaf emphasized that nothing in the progress of the constructive and peaceful consultation justified such an abrupt interruption of the dialogue, especially since the Algerian side had presented concrete proposals on the other 2 points of disagreement without receiving a formal response from its European counterpart. And the Minister of State, Minister of Foreign Affairs, National Community Abroad and African Affairs, Ahmed Attaf, has received at the Ministry headquarters the Minister of Foreign Affairs and African Affairs of the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, Mohammed Islam Baysat, according to a statement from the ministry. The meeting provided an opportunity to examine the latest developments in the Western Sahara issue in light of UN efforts to enable the Sahrawi people to exercise their inalienable right and imprescriptible right to self-determination in accordance with the relevant resolutions of international law issued by the General Assembly of the United Nations. The 2 ministers discussed the main issues raised at the level of the African Union. Representing the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, the Minister of War Veterans and Right Holders, Mr. Al-Eid Rabiga, will take part in the celebration of the 46th anniversary of the triumph of the Sandinista revolution on Saturday in Managua, Nicaragua, alongside officials and representatives from several countries. Upon his arrival in Nicaragua, Mr. Rabiga was welcomed by the Presidential Advisor of Nicaragua, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and the Minister Counselor to the President of Nicaragua for Politics and International Relations, as well as the Algerian Ambassador to Nicaragua. The Council of the Nation is taking part in the proceedings of the 5th ordinary session of the 6th legislature of the Pan-African Parliament, as well as in the meetings of standing committees taking place in Midrand, South Africa. A statement of the Upper House of Parliament indicated that during this session, which will last until August 1st, African parliamentarians will debate several themes on the agenda of the standing committees, stressing that dialogue and exchange sessions are also scheduled with African experts around various topics and constitute major issues, including peace and security on the African continent, development in Africa, food security, as well as issues of migration and mobility of people. The head of the Office of the United Nations Human or Human Settlements Programs, UN Habitat in Tunisia, Aida Robana, has said in Algiers that Algeria's experience in the field of housing is a model to follow in responding to the high demand for housing, expressing the determination of the UN agency to expand its cooperation with Algeria in the near future. Jamal Salmani has more details in this report.
In a statement to the Algerian news agency APS on the sidelines of the 44th General Meeting of the Development Bank Shelter Afrique, in which she took part as a representative of the Secretary General of the program, Ms. Robana stressed that the program follows the colossal efforts made by Algeria in the field of housing development, which she hailed, adding that it's a model for responding to the high demand for housing. Aida Robana praised the effectiveness of the financing adopted by the Algerian state for affordable housing, stressing that without adequate financing, it is not possible to build housing in a strategic and regular manner that meets all the standards set by the UN objectives. Meanwhile, the participants in the 44th General Assembly of the Shelter Afrique Development Bank, held in Algiers, called at the end of their proceedings for inspiration from the Algerian experience in the housing sector, particularly in the use of local building materials and the diversification of financing mechanisms. On this occasion, the Director General in Construction Resources at the Ministry of Housing stated that the recommendations highlighted the importance of replicating the Algerian experience in housing and urban planning by adapting it to the specific circumstances of each country, emphasizing that Algeria's strategic vision is based on strengthening inter-African partnership and realizing a genuine development dimension at the continental level. He added that the public and private investors and economic operators present expressed their readiness to export Algerian surplus production of building materials to African countries thanks to the country's self-sufficiency in many materials. It's worth noting that the participants in the bank's general meeting discussed over 3 days areas related to the promotion of local building materials, the diversification of financing sources, and the revision of legal frameworks governing housing and urban planning.
Shifting now to the Middle East, where the UN Security Council meeting, the Assistant Secretary General Khalid Khiyari has reiterated the Secretary General's unequivocal condemnation of all violence against civilians in Syria as the Israeli occupation aviation resumed and intensified airstrikes on this territory. The Assistant Secretary General also voiced condemnation of the Israeli occupation airstrikes, noting that they had targeted the Damascus authorities' forces and official buildings, including the Ministry of Defense and the vicinity of the Presidential Palace, as well as the Mosai military airport. Let's listen to the Assistant Secretary General Khalid Khiyari.
In addition to violating Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity, Israel's actions undermine efforts to build a new Syria at peace with itself and the region and further destabilize Syria at a sensitive time. It is essential that both Israel and Syria uphold the terms of 1974 disengagement of forces agreement to preserve the ceasefire between both parties and refrain from any action that will further undermine it and the stability on the Golan.
And the A3+ group has condemned Zionist airstrikes that targeted several areas in Syria, including the capital Damascus, during a Security Council session convened by Algeria to discuss the latest developments in Syria. The representative of Sierra Leone to the United Nations, Michael Imran Kanu, made a statement on behalf of the A3+ group made up of Algeria, Somalia, Sierra Leone, and Guyana, in which he condemned the Zionist attacks on Syria, stressing that they constitute a clear violation of international law and the UN Charter. Let's listen to him.
We condemn the Israeli airstrikes that recently targeted multiple areas in Syria, including Syria's military staff command building, which was being used to temporarily house the Ministry of Defense, and locations in the vicinity of the Presidential Palace in Damascus. These acts further threaten an already fragile state. These attacks represent a clear violation of international law, including the United Nations Charter, particularly Article 2.4, which prohibits the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state or in any manner inconsistent with the purposes of the United Nations and the principles of international humanitarian law.
The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has strongly condemned the Zionist attacks on a church in Gaza in which 3 people were killed and 9 others wounded. The associate spokesperson for the Secretary General, Stephanie Tremblay, said in a press briefing that Guterres has said that attacks on places of worship are unacceptable.
The Secretary General strongly condemns today's strike on the Holy Family Church in Gaza, a place of worship and a sanctuary for civilians. Attacks on places of worship are unacceptable. People seeking shelter must be respected and protected, not hit by strikes. Too many lives have already been lost. There's an urgent need for an immediate ceasefire and the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. The Secretary General calls on all parties to ensure that civilians are respected and protected at all times and allow humanitarian aid to flow into the Gaza Strip at scale.
That was the associate spokesperson for the Secretary General, Stephanie Tremblay. And the UNHCR Director of External Relations, Dominique Hyde, has said that the UNHCR is facing a critical $1.4 billion funding shortfall that threatens humanitarian programs for 11.6 million refugees and displaced people. This gap has already forced deep cuts to essential services, putting vulnerable populations at heightened risk.
At this point of the year, our funding situation is dramatic. We fear that up to 11.6 million refugees and people forced to flee are losing access to humanitarian assistance provided by HCR. And this means that 1/3 of the people that we usually assist will not be getting the services that we are usually able to provide. And behind these numbers lie families, lie lives that are hanging on a very, very thin balance. Families are seeing their support that they have relied on just vanish.
That was the UNHCR Director of External Relations, Dominique Hyde. And with this, we come to the end of this news bulletin. Time now for weekly programs. We'll leave you here, and we'll meet you again tomorrow for a fresh edition of our news bulletin. Until then, stay tuned to Radio Algeria International. Bye-bye.